Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to hold on a minute while our platform's letting everyone in. It will just be a second here and we'll get started. But in the meantime, feel free to go to the chat and let us know where you're tuning in from today. Give us a greeting. We would love to hear from you. We'll get started in just a minute here. Hello, welcome. Oh, I love seeing our participants growing and our numbers growing in the chat. Feel free to give us a greeting in the chat if you're just joining us now. We would love to hear where you're joining us from. Welcome, everyone. We started shortly. All right, well, as everyone's pouring in, I'm just gonna get us started because we have a lot of great discussion to be had this afternoon. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to today's webinar, Conquering Recovery. Recovery is Lonely. My name is Jackie Zimmerman and I'm the Public Education Associate at Mental Health America's National Office, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. I have just a few notes for you before I introduce our panelists. This webinar is being recorded and will be emailed out to all registrants within 1 week. We currently do not offer CEUs, but you can request a certificate of attendance. That link will be sent in your follow-up materials. We might have some time at the end for some Q&A with the audience as time allows, so please feel free to ask any questions in the chat and also add comments in there as well throughout our time together. We want to recognize that September is Recovery Month, and recovery is a process. We say things like healing isn't linear, but what that really means is that there are challenges, there's roadblocks, setbacks, and for a lot of people, their relationships and social connections change and their lifestyle changes. Recovery can be lonely, and so today we're going to discuss what some of those challenges look like and how to overcome them while navigating your own recovery journey. We have a lot of really great panelists with unique backgrounds that are here to share their own personal experiences and their experiences working in their specific field. We want to acknowledge anyone who is in recovery, working to improve their mental and physical well-being every single day, and we applaud you. We do want to provide a content warning that we will be discussing topics today such as depression, anxiety, child abuse and neglect, trauma experiences, substance abuse, eating disorders, and other topics that you might find distressing. We just encourage you to take care of your mental health today and disengage if needed. Now I'm grateful to welcome our speakers for this afternoon's session. We have Lisa Radzak, Keegan Wicks, Luis Cornejo, and Lori Poland. I'll give you a little bit of background on each of these individuals, and then we'll hear from them as well and get started with our discussion. Lisa is the executive director of Withall, where she leads Withall's strategic goal growth as a sustainable social enterprise dedicated to the prevention of and healing from eating disorders. Lisa has more than 20 years of experience in public affairs, community relations, and law, and nearly 15 years of experience in nonprofit leadership. Lisa does this work because she knows that eating disorders are not a choice. They're deadly and they are everywhere. Welcome, Lisa. We are so happy to have you with us.
Thank you, Jackie.
Next, we have Keegan Wicks, who currently serves as the National Advocacy and Outreach Manager at Faces and Voices of Recovery. Keegan leads public policy and advocacy initiatives for all aspects of recovery systems, infrastructure, and populations to policymakers at the state level and on Capitol Hill. Keegan has served the recovery field through roles of advocacy, peer support, counseling, and program management. An accomplished presenter, trainer, and facilitator, he has served as a guest speaker at the White House, universities, and on various special interest panels. Keegan, welcome.
Great to be here.
Awesome. Next, we have Luis. Luis is a natural entertainer who enjoys making others laugh and feel inspired. As a licensed marriage and family therapist, Luis works tirelessly to support the LGBTQ+ and BIPOC community. Luis is the founder of Psychosocial Media, a mental health platform providing mental health articles and resources. Currently, he provides mental health services through psychosocial therapy, a private practice he co-founded specializing in LGBTQ+ and BIPOC mental health. Welcome, Luis.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Happy to be here.
And last but not least, we have with us Lori Poland. Lori is a therapist, speaker, and mother of three. She is CEO and co-founder of the National Foundation to End Child Abuse and Neglect, and CAN. Lori lives in Colorado and spends her time traveling across the country, speaking on hope, healing, and possibility. Welcome, Lori.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Wonderful. And welcome to all of our panelists. Thank you all for joining us here today. We're so grateful to have you with us. We're just going to jump right in and go ahead and get started with our discussion. Each of you, as we just heard from your introductions, have a really unique background and perspective and personal story to bring to the discussion today. I would love to hear a little bit more from you about what your area of focus is and maybe your experience with recovery and your initial thoughts on this topic in regards to recovery being lonely and the impact it can have on our social life and relationships.
Yeah, so I'll jump in and first, hello to everyone. I am so appreciative of you joining us here today during Recovery Month, during what can be such a hectic time for so many within the field and those participating as members of the community. So I entered into recovery as an adolescent, and in that experience, I was in high school and was in my senior year preparing to graduate. And I went to a residential treatment for an extended period of time. And when I returned, it was a really challenging experience reintegrating back into society with my peers, and many peers of whom I needed to kind of distance myself from for my own kind of safety and protection. And it wasn't that they were doing anything wrong. It was just that it was a step that I felt that I needed to take to really ensure that my recovery could last long term. And I remember it being an incredibly challenging experience. I think everyone experiences a sense of loneliness when recovery can begin. But I certainly felt a sense of isolation that was unique, kind of walking around a high school with peers that were just in a different space than I was. And it really was an interesting experience and a direct result of the supports that I had, both in my personal life from parents and other loved ones, to the professional supports I had that helped me find people and find a sense of belonging that I was missing when I was kind of beginning that process.
Thank you, Keegan.
I can share next. So for me, it's very intentional why I specialize in working with BIPOC and queer folks. I came from a very religious home growing up and struggled a lot with not just religious trauma, but also having to come to learn about myself in a very lonely kind of way, where there was not very many folks that I could talk to, a lot of secrets, a lot of curiosity, but no one to really have support from. And I think for me, when I started college, that was probably the time where I noticed that it really hit me the most. I had a lot of depression. I experienced a lot of anxiety. I turned to a lot of substances and things like that to just help me cope, right? A lot of self-medicating that was very much related to earlier experiences. We didn't talk about mental health in my family. It was never something that we discussed. It was seen as either a weakness or something demonic or something like that. Very intense view of what mental health was, right? Depression, anxiety, trauma. I mean, all of these things, these were not words that we used in my home. And so when I got to college, I remember looking up therapists for the first time, and I actually spoke to a couple sessions. It wasn't very long, but it was the first time that I actually realized, like, okay, maybe there is some way for me to get support and get help. It was a real process. Like I mentioned, it wasn't a very long treatment, mostly because I think I had a bit of a reaction to actually talking to someone and feeling very scared and worried about how they would be perceiving me, but also talking about it. I mean, for the first time in so many years. And so it wasn't until later on that I started to think about what I wanted to do with my life. And so therapy became kind of like this accidental thing that I never planned, never thought about. And when I started researching, I eventually applied to a few schools, got in, and that was actually my first experience with therapy ever. And it was because it was a requirement and I had to go. And I remember kind of just being really upset, like, why do I have to go to therapy if I'm going to be a therapist, yada, yada, kind of not really knowing and kind of coming into this space and thinking like, I'm going to help people. And that first experience in therapy was life-changing. I mean, it was the moment where I got so much support and understanding. I found someone that was not just very in tune and understanding of my cultural background and also my experience, but who was very compassionate. And I think that made a huge difference for me. And that's when I started to notice that a lot of the work really started to happen for me, me really unpacking and unlearning a lot of these things that I thought were facts, right, about myself, about the world. And it's been a slow process. And when I think of recovery and even words like healing, I think a lot of folks are under the impression that it's kind of like this check mark or this goal that you reach, but it really is lifelong. I mean, we're constantly growing and changing and adapting, and we don't get to any type of perfection or place where it's like, I'm healed. It's really more of, we learn better ways to cope and to hold our experiences and also find people who listen and who care, and where we also grow in those relationships. So for me, it's been quite a journey that I'm still on. I still go to therapy. That was my first therapist. I've had 5 now, and not because, they haven't been good, just because each time it's been something very different. And so I'm a big fan of the therapy. And so for me, I think it was really important to help create a space where I could welcome folks who felt like me, right, who couldn't find someone that looked like them or identified like them, to be able to provide space for healing and recovery and growth. And so my practice right now, I work 100% with queer or BIPOC folks, all with different paths and challenges, dual diagnosis, right, whether it's substance use and also depression or anxiety. And so I really love the work that I do. And I think that a lot of it definitely happened because of my own experiences and my own journey. So
Thanks, Louie.
My name is Lisa. I have experience with eating disorders. The work we do it with all is related to supporting folks who are working to recover, who are at an intensive level of treatment. On the side, separate from this discussion, I'm really proud of the work we do on upstream prevention as well with our What to Say program. For recovery, when I think of recovery and reflecting on the conversation for this panel today, I go back to a quote from a book I read in high school. It was Cry the Beloved Country by Alan Payton, for those of you that are familiar. And it's, sorrow is better than fear. Fear is a journey, a terrible journey, but sorrow is at least an arrival. When the storm threatens, a man or woman is afraid for his or her house, but when the house is destroyed, there is something to do. About a storm, one can do nothing, but one can rebuild a house. And I think about the ways in which recovery is very difficult, but there's such a real gift in it too, because it's about, you get to a point where you, hopefully, if you're lucky, you'll get to a point where you have no choice but to be honest about the situation. And then it's really about recovering yourself, recovering your life. And for many of us, for myself, certainly, it's sort of a rebirth, if you will. And it starts out very, very difficult, and you have to, step by step sort of figure out what feels safe and what feels comfortable. And there's no clear path, and you have to build your own path, and you have to figure out, who am I? But I think it's such a tremendous gift, because some people never do that, right? Some people can kind of manage to get through without ever having to sort of run into a wall like some of us did with various mental health challenges or addictions, et cetera, or other. And I I'm at a place, I guess it's a little Pollyanna, but I do think of these things as a gift.
Thank you, Lisa. Hi, I'm Lori Poland, and I am so thankful to be on this panel with each of you. Keegan, Lisa, and Louise, thank you all for sharing. My experience came from early childhood trauma. I was abducted from my front yard in a very like classic kidnapping case. Asked if I liked candy, and then he put me in the pit of an outhouse toilet 15 feet below ground. And 4 days later, I was found by bird watchers, and the trauma of that continued it continued to carry on, in part because there are residual impacts of trauma on our community, on our family, and how we cope with and heal from our own stories. And so kind of living in a household where it was a shared traumatic experience, but being the eye of the storm, led me into kind of a phased recovery process. The first part of that phase was instinctual recovery. I knew that I needed to survive in my environment, and I wasn't able to get the resources and the support that I knew that I needed. So it was more about parallel playing with the people in my environment. And so I just followed my own instinct of what was good for me to survive. And I think Lisa described that Pollyanna philosophy that thank goodness I'm a survivor, because my body learned how to make it through challenging things repeatedly. And I knew that it wasn't an environment that I could share my needs because others were hurting. And then when I moved out of that and I went into a really dark place in my young adult years, similar to what Louise described, was this freedom to recover. When I was able to seek help on my own outside of my family system, then I had this freedom to recover. And then that required a courage to see what I needed to recover from, because that in and of itself was a whole other recovery path that I was not aware on this hike that I was going to have this detour. And that was interesting. And then I think once I had that courage to see it all, the key for me was surrounding myself with people I wanted to be like. And that was harder than dating, right? At times, because finding people who didn't necessarily have that familiarity and the what I've always done was challenging, because as soon as I would notice it, then it would mean having to set new relationship patterns with those people. And that meant me kind of having to be the bad guy through my recovery journey by advocating for myself. And then I would say the last piece of my recovery, the last piece, as if there's an end, right? I mean, that's kind of a joke too. I love that I'm ever growing. I see myself as a garden, right? So some years I have to put new flowers in, and I've got perennials and annuals and all sorts of stuff, but there isn't an end. But currently, this last few years has really been about finding my own voice. And that comes with a lot of consequence and a lot of ramifications. And it's also come with so many gifts, gifts for myself, gifts for my environment and the people around me. I just wrote my own memoir this summer, and that was just, I have goosebumps thinking about it. It was a life-altering experience that led to me finding my voice. So those are some of the gifts that I've been opportuned with. I wouldn't say like super lucky to have, but certainly opportuned with going through as I've gone through this recovery journey. Thanks for letting me share.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for sharing and being here today and providing your perspective and vulnerability really throughout our time together. So thank you in advance to each of you. I know you each had talked in there a little bit about those social challenges that you might have faced and still face throughout your recovery. But what are some of the most beneficial supports that you found, either for yourself or that you've seen really benefit others who are in recovery?
I think for me, like I mentioned, therapy was definitely a big one, but also a lot of reconnecting with my culture in a very different way. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of my experience was not very positive, and so I kind of grew to feel very resentful and a lot of pushback, right, towards cultural practices, things that I was taught. But through therapy, I was able to not just reconnect with that part of myself, but also really learn about me and take it in a very different way. And that was very healing for me and very helpful. I would say also it was finding people that accepted and embraced me. And like Lori was sharing, right, about when you find your voice, I mean, it definitely comes at a cost, right? There is a saying in Spanish called cargas y regalos, which basically means the things we have to, the cost and the gifts, right? And the cost, I mean, oftentimes is, people see you in a very different way, right? I mean, you're finding who you are, you're speaking up for yourself, you're advocating for yourself. And these were things that I didn't do before. And I lost a lot of friends, a lot of people who did not want to, be a part of my life because I was coming out, I was being more proud, I was being myself, I was learning to love myself. And it was a bit of a transition, but then I did find people who were very supportive, who were caring, who were loving, who wanted to be there for me, and I wanted to be there for them as well. And I am a very, very big believer that we grow through our relationships. I know self-love is a big buzzword out there, and I think that self-love and relational love go hand in hand, and it's not one or the other, or one's better, or one happens first or the other. It really is at the same time. I mean, it's happening constantly. And I think my relationships are what really helped me grow and learn to see myself in a different way, which led to me doing a lot of my own work as well, and that motivation. So I think those were the two really big things that helped me in my healing and recovery.
I want to keep this short because there's something that anybody who may be on it that's working in recovery, it's just the one thing I wish all young people would hear, and any of us that are struggling. That the quote, I'm going to give you all another quote. You might be too much for some people, those aren't your people. Or you might be not enough for some people, those aren't your people. It's not about you. You find other people. So if you're ever in a situation where you feel like you're sticking out, you feel like you're too much, you feel like don't make it about something's wrong with you. Just keep walking forward and you'll find more people that are your people.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I would piggyback on that as well. And I think there's been a couple of questions in the chat about, what do you do when you're around or in an environment that isn't supportive? And, the question is, how do you surround yourself with supportive people? And, or what do you do to get support? And I think that it's surrounding yourself with supported people. And not every treatment center is for every person. And not every treatment modality or therapist is for every person. I've been a therapist for a lot of years and I'm not everybody's person. And so as a clinician, it's my job to recognize that. But I also, at times, I think I'm amazing sometimes, and it might not line up with my clients. And so honoring that you keep going until you find what fits for you. And I think one measure for that for me has been boundaries versus needs. When I have to set a boundary, that's from people that are not my people. When I get to ask for what I need, those are my people, because my people will honor what I need and I'll never need a boundary. So that's my good measurement. As soon as I have to set a boundary with you, you're probably not my person. And so it's like, oh, I lovingly push them into the water, like just keep going, just keep flowing. And that seems to work really well for me.
Yeah, so for me, something that I didn't have when I entered recovery were peer recovery coaches in my life. And I can't express the benefit that comes with working with a peer recovery support specialist in any field. What ended up happening for me was that my parents took on the role of a peer coach, essentially, and we didn't know that at the time. We had absolutely no concept of the journey that mental health and substance use looks like, and what that was going to involve. And really, it was a stroke of luck that my parents were equipped to be able to provide me that aid, the mentorship, and the love that I needed to really be able to survive, and not even just a matter of helping me develop soft skills, but helping me navigate insurers with treatment when I had absolutely no idea how to navigate them. Helping me navigate really kind of some fundamental life things like maintaining employment for the long term. And it wasn't until I got into the work I do now that I realized that the role that they played was really mirroring the role of what peer recovery support specialists play. It echoes the idea that everyone needs someone at some point in their life. And that's the beauty of peer support specialists, is that they can be that someone, because not everyone has people immediately close to them that are capable or safe to provide these resources. And so the kind of the benefit of this is that we're seeing peer support grow at an unprecedented rate across country, where it's becoming more readily available, even virtually. And I think people have especially experienced a sense of isolation and loneliness. Those who have navigated recovery over the last few years, especially as they navigated COVID-19. But virtual communication and telehealth has played a real great role in some of this as well. And so some of what I experienced early on was people who just did not understand. And I say early on because I wasn't equipped to be able to really create boundaries and advocate for myself during that time. And so I love the idea of kind of engaging in more than one therapist over the years. Medical professionals or any other type of kind of self-help professional are really, in a lot of ways, like barbers. I mean, if you go to one and you get a bad haircut, you don't have to keep going to the other one. And yet people don't know that. They think that you must continue, or even worse, it's somehow the patient's fault. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. I mean, and so it's finding people that are well equipped to help individuals navigate the systems. And I think peer support has been an essential component of that in the work that I've done as both a peer support provider and as an individual that has directly or indirectly received those supports over the years.
Absolutely. Thank you, Keegan. Oh, Luis, did you want to add?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say thank you, Keegan, for naming that and for bringing all of this to the conversation, because I myself have worked in systems as a mental health provider and even left myself, left feeling traumatized myself from a lot of the expectations and a lot of the, blame that's put on folks that are coming to seek help, and the shame and the stigma. And for me, you're absolutely right. I think that is one of the main reasons why I even ended up going into private practice, was because I was so exhausted from constantly feeling like I was just this cog in the system, right, that had to keep reinforcing these things, and seeing people struggle and feeling stuck. In my practice, I definitely go very much by a philosophy, right, of decolonizing the idea of therapy, right, and what it means to be in relationship with others and supporting others, and taking away the power differential, right, and all of these kinds of little layers that build walls, right, for people that are trying to find the support and recovery and healing, and instead leave more traumatized many times than they actually get the help that they need. And someone in the comments mentioned too, like medication and professionals can only go so far. And I think that's another part of my work is really emphasizing that healing and growth and recovery can come from so many different avenues, that these are just some of the options that we have, but also that folks feel empowered, right, to really seek the support that they need. I think Lori mentioned that too, right? We're not all one size fits all. Not everyone is going to benefit from specific experiences. And I think that's the wonderful thing, is that folks are now also realizing that, there are options, right? They do have a choice and power. Unfortunately, that's still a lot of work, I think, that's happening, especially with things like insurance and costs, right? I mean, a lot of folks still feel very much like, well, I need to take what I can get, right? And oftentimes that's not enough. So thank you, Keegan, for sharing that. I was just like thinking, like, oh my gosh, you're absolutely right. Like, yeah, it definitely very layered.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that great discussion. And I see people pouring into the chat too. And thank you for the great points you're bringing up, and really coming back to community and finding what fits for you. And I think that's what you all just highlighted so well, is that recovery is a challenge and it looks different for every single person, and your needs might be different. And so trying something and it not working is normal and okay. And it's how you move forward and continue your recovery journey, but also realizing, and what I love that someone said in the chat too, is that then when you're starting with maybe a new therapist or a different type of treatment or a new friend group, that change is difficult in itself too. And it's like you're entering a whole new stage of recovery when you enter that different and new stage. And for a lot of individuals who are in recovery, change is something that's hard. And so just recognizing that the strength that takes as well to continue forward. So thank you all for those comments. I'm going to shift us a little. When we're thinking about recovery and community and what we've been talking about with peer support and with friendships and with people in our lives who are really helping us grow in recovery. And I think this is true for a lot of young individuals, that staying socially connected is so important. But a lot of times staying socially connected means being in social settings. And sometimes those situations can make us feeling more anxious or maybe triggered, or feeling like you might relapse into negative habits or behaviors. So how can individuals in recovery balance that social connectedness, but not putting themselves in those potentially harmful situations?
I think like many things in recovery, there is a trial and error element as you're beginning. And I think paying as best as you can, paying attention to your own self and your own feelings when you're putting yourselves in those newer situations that you have concerns about. It may provoke or it may be hard, and just really trying to tune into yourself and listen to, how am I doing here? And someone it was a peer support person, but I didn't have that title for them at the time. It's just a dear mentor and friend. I remember I got into a situation that was really difficult early on and really anxiety provoking. And she said, "Oh, didn't I remember to tell you never to get into a situation that you can't quickly get out of?" And, there's something to that, right? Especially early on, and you begin to get stronger and grow. But I think erring on the side of, if you're going to be going somewhere, drive yourself. If you're going to be somewhere where you don't know what they're going to have for food and beverages and whatever else, work to take care of your own needs. And those muscles, if you will, those mental muscles will begin to grow as you evolve and as you go through more and more experiences. But early on, you can't be too gentle or kind to yourself and putting in place things you may need just to deal with any situation that can come up. Just be nice to yourself.
Yeah, I want to follow up with what Lisa said. I think it's really important for folks to check in with themselves, right? Because we all have different capacities for socializing and connecting with others. And it's also a boundary setting, right, with ourselves, and how do we handle these situations? So it really does require us to not just have that conversation with ourselves, right? Sometimes when I say that, people laugh a little bit because they think I'm, like talking to yourself, but it really is, right? I mean, you're kind of checking in with yourself, like, well, how did I feel in, this kind of situation versus this kind of situation, and what is helpful for me, right? And I think that's where we can also tap into that support, right? Going to these social things with a friend, right? Someone that makes us feel calm or that is supportive. I know I've done that before when I've had to go to certain events or things that increase my anxiety. I ask someone that I'm very close to, they'll come with me. It feels great. I have support. I don't feel like I need to be there alone. I've had other situations where I find one or two people that I do feel very close to, that I trust, and that's my way of socializing. And so it really does change and shift. But I think it's important to listen to ourselves, right? And also be very much aware of our capacity in terms of socializing. And also, for folks out there supporting people in recovery, it's not guilt tripping or shaming, right, about these things. Yes, we know that socializing is good, and at the same time, we don't want to tell people like, you need to do this, you need to do that, this, you can't, because then it also feels like it's an added pressure, right? Maybe really addressing it and coming to it from a very different place of how this can be a community, right, and supportive and helpful, without feeling like we have to shame people. And so I think there's a lot of ways around it too, in the way that we navigate different social settings, and also what specifically it is. I know some folks feel more comfortable if it's something where it's confidential, right, and it's a group and it's supportive, versus like a networking, right, or meetup where people are more open or having talks, right? And there's events that are very specific that also help are more structured, and to help people feel more like, okay, I know what's going on. I don't feel lost. I don't feel out of place. And so this is also something for people organizing, right, to think about how they're engaging and supporting folks who are going through these experiences, who might not be, as comfortable in big social settings where there's not a lot of guidance around it, right? I know some places they'll do small groups, or they'll do more like engagement, right? And they work it somehow. So yeah, I definitely think that there's a lot of things to take in.
Yeah, I would also add a few things that I've learned through my recovery is being of service. And when I step into, if I'm at an event and I'm uncomfortable or I'm anxious, I immediately step into being of service. So I help in the kitchen, or I help with cleaning, or like I find myself helping in whatever way that I can to feel useful. But a couple other kind of rules that I try to follow is that I don't put on my 9-year-old's pants because I don't fit in them. And so I outgrow things. We outgrow things. And the venues and the activities and the social situations that I would go to, say, in my early 20s or at the beginning of my recovery journey are very, very different now. And so recognizing and honoring that if I can't wear 9-year-old pants, unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm not really sure, then I don't really need to try to, be that right now. And then I think the other part is that when we realize that we're uncomfortable, as Lisa had said, it is really cool when we take action in that moment. If I'm uncomfortable as an adult now, I get to do something about that. Like I get to show up for me, and I get to protect me, and I get to hear me and I get to meet my own needs. And so there's a lot of reward in building that muscle. I look at another rule that I have is I'm strength training my emotional well-being, and I'm building those muscles of recognizing my value and my needs and meeting them. And that isn't, I'm not going to have a six-pack, an emotional six-pack right away. It's going to take a little bit of time and a lot of practice. And then a lot of days where I don't want to go to the gym. So if I look at it from that lens, I also seem to find myself in better social situations as well.
And I think it's remembering too that I am a participant in life. which means that inevitably I will be in situations that are triggering, that will make me anxious, that will provide opportunity for setbacks. And like these are inevitabilities, unless I am to live in a bubble. And so like, and like bubbles aren't that cool. And so I want to participate. I'm trying to get well so that I can participate in life. And so as I am beginning my journey, there may be things that I'm more capable of doing at a later time than right away. And so I wasn't able to go to concerts for kind of the first portion of my recovery because it was too much. But now, like, I can go anywhere and do anything with anyone. And it's a really cool experience. I mean, there's a sense of freedom that I have that that's a direct result of a lot of the tools that have already been talked about. And it's kind of like remembering that people don't think that, like, with mental health, it means like you have to take on a new set of skills and preparedness that other people just don't normally do. And so if I'm a diabetic, I need to, if I want to live a happy, healthy life, bring along insulin, maybe some candy, maybe watch what I'm eating when I'm out, and the like. Like, that's a normal part of my life now. It doesn't matter whether it's a normal part of anyone else's. It is a normal part of mine, and it must be. Because if it's not, I don't live a happy, healthy life. There can be complications. And so similarly with mental health and substance use, in any kind of mental health, behavioral health disorder, it's realizing that there is just going to be things that I have to do that may be atypical from the rest of the world, like making sure that I'm bringing my own set of car keys and have my own transportation out the door, like making sure that I have like an accountability buddy to talk to when I need to. And it's like saying that, like, no, like maybe I have to stay in tonight. Like maybe tonight's not a great night because I've spent all day feeling anxious, and me going to a crowded bar probably is not going to be a great place for me to be right now, but like maybe tomorrow I'll be all right, and so like it's recognizing that, we're, being socially connected, doesn't mean the absence of these things. And it also doesn't mean that, like, I can't get through these things either.
I want to add to something Keegan was saying too, as you're going through the experience of social interaction or just being out in the world, as much as you can, shut down the outside looking in voice, right? So when you decide for yourself where you're at, what you need, try to have that be the end of the discussion instead of using, let's say early on, like Keegan was saying with concerts. I don't know, I don't feel like I'm ready or safe to be going to concerts at this point. That's the voice. And then the outside looking in voice to shut down is, look at how effed up I am, I can't even go to concerts. Like, that's the voice, that's the outside coming in voice that's just never helpful, right? Instead of the inside looking out voice, which is the thing to listen to, in my opinion. The other thing I wanted to say that's been really, really helpful to me is in some of the personality type assessments, if you will. So for example, Myers-Briggs is one that's really well known, and just reflecting on, I have a lot of extrovert, but I have a lot of introvert too, and honoring that. And another thing, there's a Dr. Elaine Ahrens, she wrote, she's done a bunch of research and wrote a book on highly sensitive people, a highly sensitive person. And that's been profound for me, of being aware of how I'm highly sensitive to various things that maybe if someone else is highly sensitive, they're not sensitive to the same things I am, so that I can learn and find what is going to make me feel more sensitive, what's going to like get me going more. And to own that, it's very powerful. And to not be apologetic for it. It's like, this is some wiring I have, right? That's been really helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. I think what I heard from each of you is that toolbox that you're building and the tools you're putting in And it takes so much time to realize what we need. And we might go to work and have our toolbox and get in a situation and realize we didn't put the right tools in, or the tools we have aren't working. And it's that process of figuring it out, like Lisa was saying, and really knowing, you know, what is working for us and what isn't. And it takes time, and there are those challenges along the way. But really listening to yourself and listening to your intuition and knowing what is a right and safe space for you, and maybe having to remove yourself. And I love what Keegan said about, you know, inevitably we are going to be in situations where there are going to be things that could make you anxious or trigger you or bring you back. But it's then how we know how to cope with that and how to move forward. So thank you all for that great discussion. I think moving to the perspective, I know we've been talking a lot about for those of us that are in recovery, but let's kind of turn the discussion to friends, families, partners, coworkers, individuals who are supportive of those in recovery. What are some kind of things that you see as being best practices, or just, you know, ideas of how to be aware and support loved ones or those around you in recovery?
So when any family member or friend has some life-altering experience, if a family or friend wants to be a part of that process or wants to still be a part of that individual's life, generally they have to adapt. And I think substance use and mental health are no different. One of the best ways that we can navigate that is particularly with family members and loved ones, to learn a set of skills that are supportive and helpful of an individual in what it looks like to attain or retain recovery, however that's defined. And I think one way to do that is by, and so like I say this and it sounds way more complicated than it is, by studying a modality called CRAFT, Community Reinforcement and Family Training. And so that sounds complex. It's not. You know, it's the idea of using strengths for people's lives, encouraging them to succeed, and motivating their successes by providing an opportunity for people to be a part of this journey together. There's a great book. It's called Beyond Addiction: How Science and Kindness Help People. I'm going to put that in chat when I can find a link to it. But it's a great way for family and friends to read about how to apply these skill sets, how to help loved ones in a way that's like not jargony, it's not complex, and it can be taken piecemeal. I think that's a really solid way to go about it. And then it talks, and then it's implementing that, so how can we not just like read about it, but how can we start to practice these things?
I think, loved ones instinctively want to help oftentimes, right? I want to be supportive. And two things that I would definitely encourage is, one, that people who are supporting and helping loved ones who are going through recovery to also have their own methods of caring for themselves, because oftentimes they burn out. Right. I mean, if it's exhausting going through recovery, it's also can be very emotionally draining and exhausting supporting someone, right? Because it's very complex. And so I think that one of my recommendations is for folks to also be very aware of how they're taking care of themselves, their own mental health, their own capacity, how they're offering what they have energy for, right, rather than making promises or burning themselves out, right, and adding more stress, right? Because I think that it's definitely something that's very bilateral, right? It's going back and forth. It's energy that's happening, and so folks need to take care of themselves, be very conscious of how they're also taking their own time, setting their own understanding right around their limits. And then the other would be also for folks to really learn how to listen, right? And I'm not saying just like hearing someone or like listening, but like actively listening, right, to what people are saying, to what their needs are, to their experience, without feeling the need to have to solve or combat or challenge or give their own perspective, right? But really listening to the person that they're wanting to support, and finding their own person to support them as well. So I think it's kind of something where there has to be a balance within it.
I would also add, thank you, Louise, for that. And I would just add the name vicarious trauma. And vicarious trauma is essentially the ripple effect of somebody else's experience. And whenever we're in professional relationship, friendship relationship, social relationship, or significant other relationship, we automatically are impacted by the other person's mood and by their temperament and by their experiences, by their stories. And so just simply by being in relationship with other human beings, we automatically all have our own natural reactions and responses to that. And I find a lot of times that the family either it becomes more about the impact of the greater family, or the family's voice gets lost. So it can be one of those two things. The situation or the incident or the recovery itself doesn't have an impact, or it has too great of an impact. But honoring both of those and honoring wherever that support system might need their own level of support. I think in a lot of 12-step recovery programs, there are support systems for the supporter, for the spouse of, the sibling of, the child of, the parent of, the adult of. And so there's all of these systems and ideas for those. And I think recognizing that impact and that there is space for the people around them to get support and services, and even kind of going back to Keegan's message from earlier about the peer support. There's a lot of beauty in being with other people who are in a similar dynamic and in a similar supportive role as you are. And I think there can be a lot of benefit in finding those folks.
Wonderful. Thank you all. I know we're getting close to the end of our time. This hour has flown by, but I want to be able to leave our audience with one more quick answer from each of you for this last and final question. But if anyone's listening today and they are in recovery and might be experiencing loneliness or feeling like they don't fit in, or they're struggling with their social connections in general, what would you say to them in this moment?
There are other people in the world who are feeling exactly like you feel, even though it doesn't feel like it. And perhaps more importantly, there are people who have felt the way you have felt, and are now thriving in their lives. Me being one of those people, from being very depressed and very anxious to having a lot of really terrible challenges with substance use, and not knowing how to deal with any of that, to now. I mean, it is very possible to live a happy and healthy life.
I would also add to that, Keegan, thank you for your recovery as well. But I would add to that we are the whole coin. And so there's something really honorable about it being your experience and yours to tenderly nurture and support. And then there's also something really beautiful on the flip side of that, of knowing you're not alone, and that there are so many other people that maybe don't walk the exact same path as you, but they walk a path of recovery. And when we can kind of take it to that next level, there's recovery in all sorts of dynamics. And we've spoken today, just as four professionals, of so many different layers of recovery, and we didn't even touch all of them by any means. There's so much. And when I just see these other three professionals, each of whom have their own specialty and subspecialties, that just tells me, wow, they're recovering too. Wow. And I know that we are not the only ones. So when I look at it that way, it's like I'm the whole coin. It's mine and it's ours. And I think there's a lot of beauty in that too.
I think I would say you're just right now. And what you need and want and feel is just right now. And immediately after that, the voice comes in about no and judging and hard on yourself. But you are just right now. And it's so cheesy. And if someone had said to this to me early on in my journey that, recovery is a journey, I would have been like, oh, hell, right? Like, I don't want to go on a journey. But what I mean by that is at its own pace and its own way, you are recovering yourself. You are recovering your life and who you are and who you're meant to be and all that stuff, one day at a time. There's a reason the 12 steps talks about one day at a time, right? And so just to be as kind to yourself as possible and to know that you're exactly where you should be. That's all I'd say.
Yeah, I would say, just to remember that time is not stagnant, right? It doesn't stay still. We move on, right? Things change, our feelings, our thoughts in the moment, right? They don't stay there forever. They don't stay stuck. That's something we can definitely count on, right? Time is not going to stop and it will keep going. And I think that's really important for a lot of folks who sometimes feel hopeless, right? That things won't change, to realize that time does go on, right? Things do shift, we grow. And a lot of growth and recovery and healing require us to shed old versions of ourselves. And that can be very painful and also bring up a lot of grief, right? And pain in that process. But at the same time, like Lori was pointing out before, there's so many, many gifts that also come with that. But it is a process. And I know therapists love to say, trust the process, right? Because the bread and butter, right, of the idea of really trusting that things will be okay, right? That, like Lisa was saying as well, that we are where we need to be and we will go into the direction that we have to. And like Keegan was saying, right, that also there's going to be so many layers to this process that it's not just straightforward or linear, and it's not the same for everyone. So trusting all of those things, I think it can be very difficult, but it is part of the journey as well.
Thank you all for the very wise words. I am just so appreciative of each of you. Celebrate all of what you have accomplished in your own lives through your struggles and your recovery journeys. And thank you for your openness and willingness to share that today with our audience. It is so appreciated. And I want to thank everyone who's listening too, because I have just been scrolling through the chat and there are so many wonderful things being shared and questions being asked. And if this could last another hour, I would love it. But I just want to thank you all so much for your willingness to participate and share with us about your own experiences as well. We will wrap up here for today. Just a reminder that I'll send out a follow-up email to everyone who registered that will include the link to request your certificate of attendance, as well as the recording if you'd like to go back and listen to anything. And I'll also include on there, each of our panelists today come from a specific organization. So I'll share each of those organizations' web pages. So if you would like to learn more about them and their work, you're able to do that as well. So thank you all, and thank you for joining us in this recovery month and being a part of the conversation today. Thank you.